Right, so Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everybody today to Sacred Duty, Sexual Abuse Prevention Training for Islamic Schools. Welcome. We're honored to have Dr. Ismail and Sister Qur'an here today. And it's in partnership with ISLA, the Islamic School Association of Canada. Islamic Schools League of America represents over 400 full-time Islamic schools, 100,000 Muslim students, and around 9,000 education professionals with research, resources, and relationships, mashallah. A little bit of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and the recording will be shared by next week, inshallah, or end of this week. Need to complete the feedback survey today in order to receive a certificate of participation. Reminder to please enter your name and email carefully, as the certificates will be auto-generated. The certificates will be emailed by the end of September, inshallah. Also, just a reminder, there will be some sensitive discussions happening, so please make sure there's no small children or even young adults around that you don't want to have them hear this information. Please use the chat for Q&A. Be monitoring it, inshallah. And then we're honored today to have Qur'an Shakir, one of our esteemed board members at ISLA. She is a project director for the ISLA Sexual Abuse Prevention Toolkit, a seasoned educator with at least 30 years of experience, if not probably many more years, in school leadership and instructional development. She's passionate about education, community building, and youth leadership. And she also serves as a consultant, speaker, writer, and co-owner of Celebrating Sacred Connections. Ms. Shakir is an active board member of ISLA, the Claire Muhammad Schools Network, and the Interfaith Children's Movement, among others. She's dedicated to purposeful work that uplifts communities and aligns with her faith, mashallah. We also have Dr. Ismail, Ibn Ali, who is the head of school and program manager for the Center of Innovative Religious Education, or CIRE, at Al-Fatih Academy in Virginia. He has served as a teacher and administrator in a variety of public and private PK-12 school settings over the last 15 years. His work at Al-Fatih Academy has centered on the development and implementation of innovative and integrated Islamic studies curricula. Additionally, he has played a key role in developing Al-Fatih's policies, procedures, and curriculum related to sexual abuse prevention. So an honor to have these two esteemed people here with us today. And myself, I am Sister Lisa. I'm program manager with Islamic Schools League of America. Please follow us on social media. Dr. Ashaza had put in the chat a couple of links already, but please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Join our Google group, IECN, to keep up to the latest happenings. We have a busy schedule in the next few months. Just a few of our upcoming events. You can see we have How Do We Get Buy-In? An ISLA Leaders Masterclass with Dr. Anthony Muhammad, an Empower Grant with ICNA Relief for up to $2,000 small classroom grants for teachers. We also will have next month, students with ADHD, dyslexia, and executive functioning challenges, a free workshop in partnership with Mohsen, with Dr. Nelly Kati. We also have in October, PLC, Mastering Differentiation in the Arabic Classroom, an 8-session PLC for Arabic teachers from elementary through high school with Dr. Jamana. And next week, we have a members-only monthly admin meeting where Dr. Shaza will be sharing out information from the recent CAPE and ONP conferences, as well as more information about the Empower Grant, and again, upcoming events. And please use a QR code to sign up for our upcoming events right here. Busy schedule. We also have in December our annual ISLA Leadership Retreat, Navigating the Paradoxes of Leadership, Embracing Uncertainty and Change at the DNET Center of America, December 5th through 7th, 2025. Now, there's several people on the East Coast, so a short drive or very short plane or rail ride away, so please consider joining. A lot of great information and really an opportunity to network in a very nice environment. DNET Center is great, Islamic environment, as well as the content you'll be receiving and the people you'll be meeting. I'll go back. That's for the end, and I will stop sharing. And I will turn it over to Sister Qur'an and Dr. Ismail.
Thank you so very much. And I open just seeking Allah's protection, because we know we need that. Allah's protection from Shaitan, the rejected enemy, and that is A'udhu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim. I open with Allah's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer, and that is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And then I also open by offering to us the Muslim greeting of peace, understanding that this is a special kind of peace, the peace that only Allah can give. And I know it's important for us as we involve ourselves in this important subject. So I greet you, dear beloved participants. Assalamu alaikum.
Wow, assalam.
Alhamdulillah. So it is my pleasure. I am Qur'an Shakir, and it is my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this important training. Today, we gather as educators and leaders and caretakers of one of the greatest trusts that Allah has given us, and that is our children. So we know that in Islam, safeguarding children is a professional duty. It is our duty, and it is a sacred amana, a trust from Allah that we will be asked about on the day of judgment. The purpose of, you can go to the next slide. The purpose of this session is to strengthen our understanding and our skills in protecting children from harm, especially from the hidden dangers of sexual abuse. So we're going to look at some of the things we'll be covering today. Over the next 2 hours, we will learn how to recognize warning signs, understand the process of grooming, and you can go to the next slide so they can see these objectives. The next one. There you go. Thank you. So we'll also look at how to set healthy boundaries and how to respond appropriately when children need our protection. And inshallah, if you have questions already, you know you're coming in here with certain things you know you want to walk out of here with. Go ahead and jot those down so that at the end, if we haven't answered your questions, you can come back to us and ask those questions. We want you to know, and we understand, that this training may be difficult at times, but it is essential. Together, we are building schools that are centers of learning and also safe havens where every child feels protected, every child feels valued, and every child feels respected. And we pray that Allah guide our intentions, purify our actions, and bless our efforts in this noble work, inshallah. So we have some norms that we want to make sure we honor today. And so we understand that these are some sensitive things that we're talking about. So we want you, if anytime you feel like I can't handle this or this is too much for me, go ahead and feel free to step away, to mute your audio or turn off your camera, whatever it takes. This session is being primarily produced for educators and school leaders. So that's the big focus that we will have today, inshallah. We want you to know that we will not share stories or identifying details, and we want you to not share stories and identifying details in the chat. Just focus on general scenarios and learning. We also want you to know, as Sister Lisa shared, that this is being recorded. And we have fixed it so that your names will not show. And so just so that you'll know, this session will be discussing sensitive topic of sexual abuse, grooming, misconduct. So some of the information may be triggering. Just so that you'll know, we ask that you make sure there are no children in earshot of the conversation because we want to protect them. Also, we want you to know that to make these concepts clear and practical today, we will be using what we're calling framing scenarios. And these are realistic situations drawn from school settings that help us see how abuse, grooming, or peer-to-peer harm can happen and how we as educators should respond. So by working through these examples, inshallah, you will learn the principles and as well as practice applying them in ways that keep children safe, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sister Qur'an. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So to just echo that point before we go to the next portion of the presentation, we do want to make sure that all of you are aware that, we do not replace any legal advice. We do not fully understand all of your locale, legal scenarios, legal, edicts, whatever it may be. We are coming to this as educators, as folks that have sought such advice in our own context, as folks who have had to work in school systems. And we have compiled what we think are best practices with shura from those individuals that we think can be disseminated out. And of course, we're going to always make sure and say that as part of your responsibility as your amana, as we'll see in the next two slides, it's on you all as leaders and educators in your respective schools to check with your local laws, to look at your specific institutional needs, and to adjust and adapt as necessary. Inshallah, this can be the start of that conversation and perhaps multiple conversations that you'll have bidnillahi ta'ala. And so when it comes to the sacred trust, this part of the presentation, to be honest, we could talk for the entire 2 hours, but we're going to keep it inshallah to 5 minutes. And Allah tells us in the Qur'an that we are not to betray our trusts knowingly. وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. You can also understand this to mean do not betray your trusts while you are in knowledge of the consequences of that betrayal. And so part of this presentation today is to help us to understand and to raise our awareness of the definitions and important understandings that are required to be school leaders and educators, but to also understand the impact of these things. And in knowledge of that impact, it will then inshallah spur us to ensure that, as they say, dot our I's and cross our T's when it comes to how we operate a school and how we work within a professional environment, and inshallah model that for the entire community. So when it comes to as Sister Quran mentioned, our framing scenario, these are just meant to hopefully give us an idea of how in reality you or I may be thinking about these things. So imagine for a moment that a teacher at a morning assembly at school reminds staff that our children are an amana. But a colleague later then perhaps thinks about that and says, well, what does that actually mean in practice? So what does amana require of us as educators and leaders when it comes to safeguarding students? So the purpose of this section will be to help us start to begin to answer that question of what does amana mean and what do we have a responsibility to do as it regards safeguarding students. So we'll actually come back to this scenario in a few minutes and we'll ask you to, in the chat, answer that question based on the information we have now, inshallah, provided. So amana in the Arabic language is written as such on the screen, and I put in blue the 3 root letters of the Arabic language. So as the kids would say today, one of my side quests is I teach Quranic Arabic, and the root letter system of Arabic has always fascinated me because it gives you a view of how our deen, which is rooted in the Arabic language, as with the revelation of the Quran, gives us a worldview to then understand concepts. And so when it comes to what is a sacred trust, this amana, those of you who have knowledge of some Arabic vocabulary will know it's related, has the same root letters as the word amnun, which has meanings of safety and reliability. It's related to the word amin. Our Prophet ﷺ was known as as-sadiq al-amin, the trustworthy. That term is also used for a guarantor, someone who is looking over the rights of others. That person is amin to whomever is ma'mun, the person that is being put in their safety or care. It's related to the word amin. Allah describes, for example, baladan amina in the Quran, that it is a place, Mecca is a place that is for the Prophet because he is there free of fear. And it is a place that is secure from any sort of outside harm. And then we have the word iman. The word iman is actually from the same root in Arabic. We translate that as belief, but linguistically, iman is a verbal noun that means to render someone or something safe. So for example, by believing in Allah and in the arkanul iman as we call it, we now render ourselves safe from, for example, the fire. We render ourselves safe from perhaps, right, being as influenced by the whispers of shaitan. So as a believer, we also have a responsibility to make other people and other places safe. And it relates to Allah's name, Al-Mu'min, which again, for you and me, if I call someone else a Mu'min, we would translate that as believer. But that doesn't apply to Allah. Allah's name, Al-Mu'min, doesn't mean that. It means this meaning of granting someone or something serenity and peace or security. And so for us, if we are to embody that attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we must embody this framework that as a believer, it is my responsibility to anyone around me that they are safe from harm from me. Al-Muslim man salima al-Muslimuna min lisadihi wa yadihi. A Muslim is the one who other Muslims are safe, are safeguarded from them, their hands and their tongue. So this is our responsibility in general. And then when it comes to children as a sacred trust, children are from the most precious gifts Allah can give any of us, whether they're our own or the ones that we're in charge of. Parents, educators, caregivers, and leaders are entrusted to protect their well-being, their safety, and their dignity. And so to violate that trust is a violation of our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so as school leaders and educators, we must consider a few questions. How do we create environments that promote students' spiritual, emotional, and physical safety? How do we use our understanding of amana to influence our commitment to our legal and ethical duties? And perhaps how do we continuously improve our practices and policies? All of our schools are in different, levels of maturation, if you like. And so no matter where we are on that spectrum, whether we have policies perhaps explicitly in place or not, all of us can improve. And we have to have that mindset when we look at the information, inshallah, that we'll be presenting today. And so part of upholding sacred trust in schools and communities are when we talk about it, we're talking about creating safe spaces where children are protected from harm, empowering children to speak up and to know their rights, to train staff and parents to recognize, report, and prevent abuse, and to develop school policies that reflect this sacred responsibility. So with that said, okay, we revisit our framing scenario. And so I ask you all to take a minute in the chat. We're not going to be able to address all of them, but we still would love your input because together we'll collectively see what do we think? What would be your 1 or 2-liner response to someone who asked you, well, what does this mean in practice when it comes to safeguarding our students? And I guess we'll also test how fast you can type, inshallah. So go ahead and let's see your initial responses come in. Okay, mashallah. So they're starting to come. Transference of responsibility from parents to us. Yes, our children are with us, for most of us, a minimum 8 hours a day. For some parents and their families, it's actually more, subhanAllah, than perhaps the parents and families may have with their own children, where they're awake at least, right? Um, you know, uh, being true to your duties and responsibilities and your positions, protecting them as if they are your own children, giving them a venue to speak, making sure that they are safe and that they are healthy. Not going beyond, don't do ifrat and tafrit, right? I saw that somewhere. Negligent or excessive in your treatment or interactions with students. Excellent. These are excellent responses. And of course, there's much more that can be said about them. But if we have this essential understanding that what we're talking about today, no matter how difficult it is for the protection of children as Allah's creation, as our responsibility, then inshallah, it will help us through the tough conversations that have to sometimes be had. So thank you all for doing that. We now move, inshallah, to Sister Qur'an, who will talk us through a little bit about our specific topic today of child sexual abuse, starting with some definitions and then some warning signs.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Ismail. We want to begin this particular session with understanding, framing the scenario. So let's say that during recess, a staff member overhears a student on the playground say to another student, "Someone showed me something inappropriate online," but quickly changes the subject. How should they respond having overheard the student? So what we want to do now is to look at this particular section. We'll be looking at critical definitions that begin to inform how Islamic school leaders and educators respond to behaviors or situations that may seem to be inconclusive. And when we look at these, we understand these terminologies, then we understand how we should be responding. So we'll look at some definitions here of sexual misconduct first and some other things. And again, this begins our understanding that some of this may be triggering, some of this may be a little sensitive. So if it gets to be too much for you, please do step away, because that is not our intention to harm, but for us really to grow and be protectors of our children. The first thing we want to understand is that sexual misconduct is any sexual behavior or any act, including verbal or physical conduct, that is inappropriate, that is not wanted, and it violates professional or legal boundaries. So that can be, in simple terms, anything that is sexual in nature. And we have a lot of things we can think about that could be sexual in nature. To understand that, then we want to look at the idea that sexual misconduct is misappropriation of what you know and what you should be doing. When we think about the concept of child sexual abuse, this concept has its legal definition, and that is the involvement of a child in sexual activity that he or she cannot give informed consent to, or that violates laws or social taboos, including contact and non-contact acts. So when we say that a child cannot give informed consent, children, because they are minors, they are not able to say yes or no. And even if they say yes, we cannot accept that as okay. In simple terms, what we're saying is that when an adult or when a teenager or any older child uses their power to involve a child in sexual activity, then this is child sexual abuse. And this could be involving a child who cannot give consent, a child or children. It involves manipulation, trickery, or force. And it has different looks for us. So we're going to get a little bit into that a little later, but this is just to give you the definition. These acts can sometimes or are often committed by someone who the child knows and trusts. And that's a big thing that we have to keep sharing, because sometimes people think it's a stranger. Most of the time, it's someone the child knows or trusts. For clarification, we just want you to understand that we don't use the term abuser, we use the term perpetrator. And we use this term to describe anyone who commits child sexual abuse or is accused of committing child sexual abuse, so that we can keep with the language of safeguarding policies and emphasize accountability, because we know that this act is not just about bad behavior, but it is a serious violation and a crime. And a lot of times this crime infringes on our children's emotions and their spirits. So, mashallah, for that. For the religious implications, we want you to know and understand that there's a spiritual side to for us being connected to our children, and we are raising our children to learn to love Allah and respond to Allah. And child sexual abuse is one of the gravest sins, because it combines the major sin of kaba'ir, but also zina, fornication, and related acts harming a child, breaking the trust that we have given to Allah as an adult in interacting with our children. And when our children are trusting us and learning who Allah is and how to respond to Allah, we don't want to break that trust. So abuse is not only a crime, we say is a spiritual wound that must be prevented and healed with compassion and justice. That is our driving force, is that we are building in our children's spirituality, and this harms them. And that is not the goal of us as educators and believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's go back to that scenario that we had. During recess, a staff member overhears a student on the playground saying to another student, "Someone showed me something inappropriate online," but they quickly changed the subject. How would you as a staff member respond if it was you having overheard the student? What do you think? So in the chat, go ahead and share. Indicate what elements of this scenario do or do not indicate potential sexual misconduct or abuse.
As you all will see, inshallah, we've also tried to make these such that, you may be saying, well, there may be other things to consider, and that actually will come up in the next piece of the presentation. So, as you think about these scenarios, that we're using, just remember that piece. We want to look at it as you understand it at this point, but we may add further knowledge later, and you could always come back and revisit that scenario.
Yes, someone showed me. That's a good way to look. That's one part of that we will look at.
Yeah, right. There's a
Inside
question there about consent.
quickly changes the subject. That's an indicator. Yes. Something inappropriate, absolutely. And yes, that idea of something inappropriate does show a potential, and it also shows an understanding that something's not quite right. And here we talk about go with your gut feeling to understand. So you hear this, and what do you think? How should they respond having overheard this? Okay, something that indicates potential abuse. Yes, the child indicated it. How should they respond? The word online is an indicator. Yes.
Yeah, so some things to consider here, as I see some folks chiming in on the chat. Someone said, perhaps there's a follow-up conversation with the student. So you would have to perhaps consider, well, where, when? Is it right then and there? Is it with the student that they were disclosing that information to present? Some of you said, I saw someone say, go to the principal and arrange a meeting, right? So you're thinking about seeking the proper internal authority that you have in your school for advice on how to approach that. That's important. There's a general sense here that you need to find out a little more, right? And for those of you who have counselors in your schools or have access to a counselor, right, that would be someone perhaps that you engage to figure out what is the best way. It takes a lot of nuance and skill and practice, to be honest, and just experience over the years to figure out how to talk to the student about it without leading them into something, without making them, talk about something in perhaps a way that might trigger them further, right? There has to be some sensitivity there. It's not easy, but understanding we do need some info, and it should raise a concern for us because there are some signs there that are potentially problematic.
Yeah, and there was one statement that the child should be informed about who to go to, who to talk to.
Mhm.
Yes, and that is important, but sometimes children may be hesitant and they talk to who they feel comfortable talking to.
Yeah. Okay, these are good. Hold to these thoughts. We promise that as we go through, you will have, inshallah, some more guidance on specifics of them. But I think you all are starting to see here there are potentially a few ways you could go about this. But perhaps the key words here, trust. Is there a trusted adult the child may have? Do you have a policy in place at school of what you should do, right? That you, as an educator, you would be thinking about that. Do I talk to them privately? Is there another person there? Who is the person? When does this happen? There's a lot of consideration. So inshallah, to help inform that, you have to understand what are a little more into the signs. And that's where Sister Quran will also talk a little bit more
Yes.
regarding that.
And so you hear this child offering a warning, but we also now want to understand the warning signs of child sexual abuse. And when we understand some concepts here, then we can understand those warning signs. So here's our framing scenario. Think about it. A middle school student has started pulling away from friends, avoiding eye contact, and asking to go home early. A staff member remembers that they noticed the other day a particular volunteer giving the student small items that were not passed out to other students. What might be happening, and what should the staff member do? Think that through. So in this particular section, what we're going to do is just look at some critical warning signs that begin to inform how Islamic school leaders and educators should be responding to behaviors or situations. So we'll look at what is our response when we see and hear certain things. We are attuned now to what is going on with our students and what's going on in our environment. And what you want to know is that there are 3 general buckets of warning signs or indicators: physical, behavioral, or social and emotional, and verbal cues. So let's look at physical signs. With the physical signs, this is a focus list that looks at what the school personnel will want to consider. So physical signs are not limited to, but they could be unexplained bruises, any pain that a child may be indicating, bleeding, or physical marks that cannot be explained by normal play. So this, again, we're saying to you, you may see this at school. Difficulty or discomfort or pain when walking or sitting. So you're observing your children. Frequent somatic complaints like headaches or stomach aches. Sudden changes in hygiene habits. And in the next slide, I'm going to explain to you what that could look like. One sign alone does not confirm abuse. So we want to iterate that. It's not just one thing, because we don't want to be ready to go and report because we see a child walking funny or showing difficulty with sitting. That's not the only thing. So we're going to pay attention to, is there a pattern? Is there a combination of signs? And that's when we have our concern raised. And we also want you to know that Allah has given you a gut instinct. Trust your instincts, and do not ignore them. It's speaking to you. So what we look at when we look at the hygiene habits that may be red flags, this is a list that you can really look at and see, has this child who has normally been comfortable and feeling safe and not showing any of these signs now changed to this behavior? So having an obsession with washing or excessive cleanliness, and they were not like this before, and all of a sudden they have this, or even using strong soaps or perfumes to try to mask what they call uncleanness. So they may think, I'm just dirty now, and they want to look clean again, feel clean again. And so they may do this. This is a sign. And what you want to do is make note. Keep a journal and just make note of it. You don't have to respond immediately, but keep note, pay attention. There could be avoidance of hygiene also, so they could neglect their hygiene. So if they're wearing the same clothes repeatedly, they don't want to change their clothes, especially their undergarments, think about that. Why? Appearing dirty or unkept despite previously being attentive to cleanliness. So if this is a change, you want to note it. Refusing to use the bathroom at school or in certain places. This is something to note. And then if there is a fixation or a discomfort with their private area, so those are 2 different extremes, pay attention to it. One is that they may insist on wearing multiple layers of clothing or underwear, or if there's a fixation on their private area. So that can look differently as well. But you want to be careful and pay close attention to these hygiene habits. Then you'll also have behavioral signs. And in the behavioral signs, they are acting a particular way. And so these are just some of the signs. They may suddenly have mood swings. They may suddenly withdraw. They may have a fear of being alone, or they may be very, very clingy. They want to be connected and stay in front of somebody to feel safe again. They may, if they're for younger people, and sometimes elementary, sometimes middle school have also been known to do this. They may regress and begin to wet the bed again, or they may be thumb sucking now, sucking their thumbs. They may avoid certain people and certain places. And then here's one that we pay attention to. They may begin to self-harm. And that self-harm looks different. This is especially in older children, usually around middle school. You'll start to see that self-harm if something has happened, or risky behavior. And again, we repeat, one sign alone does not indicate that it's something. So you're watching for the patterns, the combination of signs. And this is when you're thinking, something in you is talking. Listen when it's speaking. So yes, definitely more than one for Sister Noor. How many behavior signs do you need to see? Definitely more than one you want to see, but you want to see this pattern also. That's what you're looking for, this pattern of the changes that are happening. When you talk about the verbal cues could be using sexual language that's not appropriate for their age. You have to question, where did they get this from? Talking about quote unquote secrets with adults or older youth. And then saying they do not want to be around a certain person, as we indicated before. This is a important sign. You want to just pay attention. Why don't they want to be around a certain person? They say it to you, so they're indicating something to you. They may make indirect disclosure. Something bad happened, they may say. I don't like how such and such touch or touches me. Listen to them when they say this. Make note of this when they say it, because they are speaking to you. And again, we say it is maybe more than one sign. So you want to look for that pattern and trust your instincts. We cannot say that enough. And then the question is, what if a child has some kind of behavior issues that has nothing to do with child abuse or anything? How do we know? And you will know if there is a change, is what we're talking about. So some things, you know the children, you know how they act. But when you see some things that begin to look different, note it, is what we're saying to you. Do not dismiss it, because you may think they have challenges already. So note it. This next subject I want you to understand is that child sexual abuse doesn't usually begin suddenly. In many cases, the perpetrator carefully builds trust with a child, with their family, and even with the school staff before the abuse happens. We have to be aware. This process of doing this, building that trust, is called grooming. Grooming is dangerous because it can look like kindness, attention, or special treatment. That's why it's often missed or dismissed until it's too late. So we must pay attention. As educators, we need to know the red flags, not just in how children act, but also in how adults may act around them. So we're very careful and cautious about who we bring around our children. So let's take a closer look at grooming and what it is and how it happens and the warning signs that we must not ignore. So, as I said, it's a pattern of behaviors designed to build trust with a child, their family, or the community to facilitate future sexual abuse. So, when you're looking at them, often they look like, oh, they're just helpful. They're just helping out. What a nice person. It may, if you hear them encouraging secrecy, this is just between us, they may say. And early on, 1, 2-year-olds, as soon as they're able to have language, teach them we don't keep secrets. If someone is starting to give gifts, whether it's money or gifts or special privileges, pay attention. They may also flatter the child. You're the chosen one. You're so special. Be very careful and cautious of that. Becoming overly involved in a child's personal life. Look for that. Why are they so involved? Why are they so interested? And if they attempt, this is very important, if they attempt to isolate the children from others, whether physically or emotionally, this could be a grooming that's taking place. So in that, what we want to know and understand is that these are the red flags. Red flags may include touching that pushes or violates boundaries. Long hugs could be one of those. Frequently commenting on a child's appearance or their maturity. You're just growing up. You're looking so grown. Frequently talking to the child about sexual topics or joking inappropriately with them on these kinds of topics. Testing boundaries and then minimizing it. I was just playing. We don't play like that. That's what I will often say to people. We don't play like that. Offering to help with hygiene, with sleepovers, and rides without reason. Pay attention. Very important. Those are your red flags. And then there is one that is kind of difficult, because while we often think of abuse as something that adults do to children, research shows that children and teens can also harm their peers. This is called peer-to-peer abuse. It can happen in schools, it can happen online, or even within friend groups. So our responsibility then is the same: to protect the children, whether the harm comes from an adult or another child. Peer-to-peer abuse does not mean a child is bad or beyond help. It means something harmful happened that must be taken seriously. It should be reported, and it should be addressed with both the victim and the one causing harm. Both need safeguarding, but in different ways. Even if it seems quote unquote minor or like teasing or peer-to-peer abuse, it should be recognized as harmful. Schools need clear reporting pathways, so you need to have protocol and policies in place. The same rules apply whether the perpetrator is an adult or another student. You have to respond without shame, without blaming, without public exposure. Protect the victim and address the behavior of the child causing harm with firm boundaries, counseling, and parental involvement. We have to know that children are born in a state of fitra, a state of innocence. And when peer-to-peer harm happens, it's a sign of something learned, something observed, or something unaddressed. And as educators, our role is to stop harm, protect all children, and guide them back to healthier behavior. So when we look at peer-to-peer, we look at the idea that this is consistently coercing or manipulating or threatening another child. That's how it could look. These are red flags. It is unequal friendship dynamics with pressure. If you find that a peer uses their age, their size, or their status to control a relationship, or they use power or popularity or threats to intimidate, be very careful, pay attention. And then sharing explicit images or pressuring others for them is also a red flag, or forcing or coercing a peer into sexual activity is a red flag that we want to pay close attention to. So now we've given you a lot. We know that this was heavy for us. I know it was for me. Let's go back and revisit the scenario. A middle school student has started pulling away from friends, avoiding eye contact, and asking to go home early. A staff member remembers that they noticed the other day a particular volunteer giving the student small items that were not passed out to other students. What might be happening? What should the staff member do? You can share that in the chat. Indicate what you think might be happening and what you think they should do. I know that was a lot to take in, but we do want you to process it. And that's a part of the reason we're doing the framing scenario, so that we can really think through what happens. It could be, yes, definitely. She said, could that be a sign of grooming? It could possibly be, because remember, we talked about they're showing special treatment, they're giving them gifts, they're making them feel special emotionally or physically. So you want to pay attention that it could be grooming, yes. And yes, hiding something that they don't want anyone to find out about, absolutely. So the secrecy thing, this is a sign. So you want to pay attention to this. Look for the patterns. Thank you. You heard that. Yes. And definitely document and report. So you want to go ahead and document means keep that journal of what goes on in your space on a regular basis. So you want to keep that date, time, what happened. Just note it. And so when you start seeing the patterns, you can really go back and look at on this date at this time this happened. But you can see that grooming taking place. And so you do want to make sure you're taking special precaution to be protective. And good job, Salima, who says, talk to the volunteer and find out why. And it could be grooming. Yes. Tell the principal what you notice. Document. That's the part of documenting, telling. Yes. And come closer to the child to understand. Yes.
Yeah, and then I would say, as we're about to go into the next section is about school policies and procedures. For any of you who are joining who are administrators, quite a few of your educators who have joined us are saying, take it to an administrator. And of course, as an administrator myself, I would expect that of my staff. And then there's the question for the administrator. What will the administrator do now, having had a staff member tell them that they've observed this? How do you talk to that volunteer? And again, if you step back from that, whenever you have people volunteer, do you go over key expectations for volunteers, right? Again, someone may never think that volunteering at a school could lead to grooming, right? Or could be an avenue for grooming to take place. But that's why, as a school, you have to think through, and with this knowledge, think through those possibilities. And we have this concept in the deen of sadd al-dhara'i, right? You have to block the means. So if something itself is harmful or deemed haram by the sacred law, then that which leads up to it must also be blocked off. And
Yes.
so we're not talking about, passing a religious ruling on volunteering at a school. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you have to think about what are the avenues. And that may seem sometimes like, wow, I have to really consider a lot. And the answer is yes, you do. Yes, you do. Absolutely. And that's why being an administrator has the responsibility that it has. And at the school level, at this teacher level, it also involves your responsibility over your classroom and getting to know your students, right? You can see at the core of this, a lot of this is really, do I know my students well? Can I, um, when I observe a change, right? A, am I even aware of the changes that I observe or that are happening? And B, then how do I then get the help that may be needed for them? And so that takes us
Really, I
into
think some of the
yeah, go
questions
ahead.
that we have here, they're asking, we have more than one asking about should they talk to the volunteer or not, or talk to the child. So this next section I think is important when we start looking at what are the policies and procedures that you have in place at your school and not just something in a book. I think it's important for us to be sure to talk about what these policies and procedures are so that when it happens, we're able to respond. Dr. Ismail, you
Absolutely.
have it.
Thank you, Mr. Rahim. So, um, let's get into that a little bit. We do have a new framing scenario here, and um, part of the reason why we have these different ones is to also present you with different possibilities of the types of scenarios you may come across. So the answers may be the same across some of them. The answers may be different. And again, it may vary based on context. So imagine a scenario here where a teacher observes a colleague who often keeps their classroom door fully closed when tutoring students one-on-one after school. What should the teacher, i.e., the one who observed the other person doing this, what should they do, if anything? And so this section rather is meant to highlight the proactive elements that we are encouraging schools and would highly, highly encourage them to begin to think about, if they haven't already, how they can clarify professional boundaries, right? That's within the control of the school. The school can dictate and clarify professional boundaries for everybody in the building. The school can also dictate and clarify the policies and practices that anybody who enters the building and or interacts with students, whether in the building or not, the school can dictate that. And how do we use those things to then prevent and train to prevent opportunities for abuse, right? We're talking about preventing the opportunity, right, within our school, our school contexts. And so again, just because this is about policies and procedures, we have to stay, we are not legal experts, but again, we have, alhamdulillah, consulted with such experts, and are doing our best to provide what we understand to be the best practices. So as always, follow up with your local agencies, your regulations, look at your specific institutional needs. So when it comes to how do you interact with students how do adults interact with students, there's of course in-person communication interaction. So school employees and volunteers, right? And again, if you have, for example, guests coming into your building, right? So I imagine quite a few of our schools will have, a security officer, and there's policies you have to have around what if a contractor has to come into the building and fix a light bulb, for example, right? You're going to have different people perhaps coming in and out, and you have to set up a system to be careful with who do you allow to enter into your building, right? So provided the person can enter the building, all right, you have to be aware of behaviors that are often associated with inappropriate conduct. And again, look at this, create an appearance of impropriety, right? We're trying to avoid even the appearance, right? Let alone the deeper and actual, may Allah protect our children, our institutions from any such, impropriety. So conducting ongoing private conversations with individual students that are unrelated to school activities, right? You may have to meet with a student one-on-one to go over their latest assessment. You may have to meet with a student one-on-one to talk about reminding them the expectations for how we line up as we prepare to go to the musalla, right? There may be many scenarios where you have to do that, but it's related to school activity, right? It's purposeful. It is public, right? To some capacity, and we'll talk about what we mean by that. And it's accessible. So conducting conversations in inaccessible locations will create an appearance of impropriety. So a room with a door fully closed without any viewing access, that is a potential red flag, right? Secluded areas, whether that be certain staircases in the building, blind spots if you have cameras in your building, right? If you can't see the camera, then the camera probably can't see you. So we know perhaps there are blind spots in the buildings that we have. Bathrooms, these kinds of sensitive areas, inviting students or visiting students for social contact off school ground without proper parental permission, right? There's a reason why even when we are in charge of students on a field trip, we have to get parental permission, right? So imagine, and again, it may come from someone who knows this family and they work, you know them outside of school. But when you have your school, topi on, your school hat on, you have to follow, you are a representative of the school. You are not acting in your capacity as a community member at that point or as a family friend at that point. And you are a representative of the school. So you have to make sure that you are not putting yourself in a situation, and you have to direct your staff to not put themselves in situations where that visibility or that appearance of impropriety could be the case. So I see some, thoughts here about school policy, and that's what we're trying to look at here. Personal contact between adults and students must always be non-sexual, appropriate to the circumstances, and unambiguous in meaning. Again, unambiguous in meaning. So for example, right, a hug, right? A long hug can become ambiguous, right? If you are a male at a school, right? At least in my survey of a lot of Islamic schools, male teachers are usually less in proportion to the number of female teachers, right? May not always be the case, but that's generally what I've observed in my time in Islamic schools. So, as a Muslim male in an Islamic school, right, I have a very clear, I don't hug any student, to be honest, right? If a little first grader comes up to me and hugs me, right, I'm not going to push the student away, but I'll give them that warm thank you so much, and I make sure that I distance myself from the student right away, right? You have to just you never want that possibility of appearing to have done something or to do something that could be misconstrued. And our sunnah teaches us that from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So violations of these boundaries include physical contact that could be reasonably interpreted as sexual harassment. Okay, so that could be physical, that could be verbal, right? Any sort of communication, singling out a particular student or group of students for personal attention and friendship, giving extra unwarranted compliments. Okay, this this idea of seeking to be physically close to a student unless you are helping them with a classroom task. Um, the idea of getting down to the level of a student, right, that you're working with and not towering over the student and being aware of personal space. There's a reason that we have those considerations when we're just managing our classroom, right? There's deeper things there that psychologically a child may interpret based on something as simple as how do you stand next to them? How do you approach them? How do you face your body towards them? What part of them are you looking at when you are engaging with them? Okay, so as leaders in a school, you have to think about for your staff just those constant little reminders. It doesn't have to be anything, super drawn out, but the reminders benefit the believers. الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين. And so we have to constantly have that. And of course, we can always make recourse to our staff handbook. And that's why we hope some of these policies here you can just put directly in your handbook. And ISLA, as we'll see, we've been working on what are some template documents that you all can take and actually just put in your handbook and adjust as you need for your specific local regulations that will communicate the same essential expectations. There's also the electronic communication, and this, to be honest, is for me, causes me a lot of anxiety thinking about managing this in our day and age. And the amount of access that we now have to potential access that we now have to families and to children via an email address. It's something that schools, I think, the tech piece has to be a big component of how you address technological safety in your school. And so we have to make sure that when we're using the official channels of communication that a school has, so if you have a student information system, right? For me, I know it's always a thing to remind teachers when you're emailing families, you're using the school information system, right? You're using the emails that those parents have signed off to say, I am allowing you to interact with me with these email addresses, right? It cannot come off as this is Mr. Ismail, who I see at Maghrib every other day, is emailing me now. This is Ismail as head of school emailing you, as eighth grade Islamic studies teacher emailing you. That has to be established, right? And then doubly so, I would say perhaps with the students. Again, just to be real, right? We live in a world where some of us are on social media, our students are on social media. Our students may be reaching out to us on social media, right? They may find your account. I had students that would just try to find my account. That's just the reality of the world we're in. And students will DM me and I will just absolutely not respond. It's just, nope, nope. I'm just not even gonna get a response. They'll ask me in school, Ustad, you didn't respond. I said, exactly. Assalamu alaikum. And I move on. So that's how you have to be, right? You can't play around with that kind of again view of what could be the case. Whether there was an attempt to conceal the communication from admin or parents, right? If you would feel awkward about another colleague or admin or someone seeing what you've sent, we have to have that self-awareness and to think about what we are doing. So some best practices that align with this. And I've included here, school board members, administrators, teachers, staff, school volunteers, and parents. Right? As much as we can train our community as well, we have to. Are expected to follow these guidelines and best practices when interacting with students. Right? Meet with any student with at least one other adult present. So, alhamdulillah, at the school that I work at, we are blessed to have a counselor. Okay? If the counselor meets with a student, right, they may need to meet with the student one-on-one. That's when the second piece would come in, right? Meeting with students in a space that is accessible, that is not fully enclosed. There's a window. There is something where someone else can come. If it's not if I am, for example, the situation where we saw a student was shown something inappropriate, like what I would do at my school is I would ask the counselor to follow up with that student prior to the teacher, reported that to me. And I would have the counselor have another trusted adult of the student, if there is one, be there as well, just to have another person that can speak to what happened in that interaction. If ever there came a day or a time where someone, sued my school, I want to be able to say there were two people there and someone else was able to be there to speak to what happened between that child and that adult in the disclosure of information. Again, it's not always going to be possible, but we're talking about best practices. When helping a student with a bathroom situation, especially our younger students, try to have two adults present. I know that's difficult for schools. I know a lot of us are short-staffed. If it means, if you have a teacher assistant that floats and you have your specific bathroom time that a certain group of students are going to the bathroom, right? Um, you have to think about how can I have the most coverage so that there's no potential view of impropriety with helping a student. Um, Respond to a student who asks for help in a visible location. So maybe, for example, a student got injured outside, and you need to take them to, maybe you have maybe a lot of us don't have a school like nursing room or something, but wherever your place is where you help a student, um, you're making sure that someone else can help. Maybe it's just another student that just walks with you to help that student get to where they need to be. And then you call your another admin as an assistant, whatever. You're working with them in a place where there's other people. Because we may have to assess what's wrong, what's hurting. It may involve touching a student, right? You want to always just have those considerations in mind. So doing it in a public place, right? The public nature of something will a lot of times just automatically filter out a lot of potential for um, viewing something negatively because you're aware that there's other people around. So those are some of them, right? ETGs you can probably go through line by line and have more, but these are the general high level best practices.
I want to also emphasize when we're saying that we don't want to be alone with the child, especially the younger children sometimes may need help in the restroom, and that policy has to be clear as to how you respond. And one of the things that we make sure to do is to tell parents also that this is our policy, and so your child needs to be able to help themselves. And when they needed help today, and I did not offer that help they needed, I stood at the door and watched them. You have to be able to communicate that, but I think that's very important for us to emphasize that, because sometimes we may want to bend the rule, but it's important for us to follow it.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. That parent communication piece is essential. The more of our community, students, again, at the right ages, staff, and parents are aligned and know that this is how the school handles X, right? Then the easier it will be, inshallah, to resolve any potential issues that come about. And you can always fall back on your policy that you have put out there that parents can, look at if they have more detail, if they want to see more detail, and they can then ask you about as an administrator. All right, so now let's go back to that scenario. A teacher observes a colleague who often keeps their classroom door fully closed when tutoring students one-on-one after school. What should the teacher do, if anything? So in the chat, indicate one or two of you I saw already started, alhamdulillah. What do you think the teacher should do who made this observation? And I'll just say, as you all think, that I thought about this because, what do we call it? The bystander effect. Sometimes you see a car crash on the highway, and someone you pass by, you're like, oh, someone's probably already called, right? 911 or whatever. And I know as an administrator, if I found out that a teacher knew something and didn't come to me with something of concern, no matter how small, right? Part of the problem is we sometimes, as Sister Quran will talk to when we talk about reporting potential abuse, we sometimes try to figure out how big the problem is. And that then prevents us from taking the step we need and allowing people who have more training to then actually get to the root of whatever issue is potentially there. And so I'd rather have teachers over report to me, right? And then together we can have a conversation to then figure out, okay, is this a one-off thing? Is it something that we need to look at more closely? Do we need to revisit a policy? I think helping teachers realize like you are the first, for most of us in a school, first line of defense. You are the ones watching kids all day long. So please, if you see something, you have an amana to the child, okay, that any child in that building you have an amana to. And if it means that's your, grade team member that is potentially doing something wrong, well, the child's safety and security is higher priority than whatever could result that may potentially impact your relationship with that colleague. It's tough. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy. Okay. It's easier to say, harder to do, but that's what you have to consider. And again, we're looking at perhaps this could just be something as simple as a reminder to staff, right? If it's you've seen it once, there's no other report of it before, reminder to staff. Staff, as we are in the middle of the school year, alhamdulillah, first month is done. Here are a few key reminders to make sure, right? And then you as an admin, maybe you take your walks through the school. You're going to make sure you walk on that floor or wherever that part of the building is a little more for the next few days to just keep track of things, right? If there's a pattern, someone else has reported it. Now you start you start to figure out, okay, what do we need to do? What is going on here? And yes, talking to the teacher is important, right? It's going to be important finding out why. So with that, inshallah, that leads us to this next piece, which is, okay, we have a scenario where there is some suspected abuse, or as we've seen already, perhaps a disclosure from a student to either another student or a student to an adult, whatever it may be. So how do we now respond to that? That's what this next piece is going to be about. And I'll pass it to Sister Qur'an.
Yeah, so this is important. And in our last session, that was one of the things we talked about. How do we do this? So it's very simple for us. Number one, we have the policies in place. We have the procedures in place. And now let's look at the actual reporting process. We've already told you how important it is to document. So you're keeping a journal with important data and information about time, who was present, and what occurred. One of the most important things you want to note is that when you are responding to suspected or disclosed abuse, that you don't want to add your temperament into it. You're influenced by your own thinking. Just give the facts. That's what's important for us. Give the facts. So in giving those facts, let's start with our framing scenario. A 10-year-old quietly tells a teacher that someone at home is doing bad things to me, but don't tell anyone. What should the teacher's response be, both in words and actions? Should anyone else be involved? So let's think about this, because what we're looking at in this particular section is we're highlighting the proactive elements that begin to inform how Islamic school leaders can train their staff on appropriate responses to disclosures, to mandated reporting steps, and to supportive communication with children and families. We've talked about it in the chat. Now let's look at it. So the steps to reporting suspected child abuse. Here's what you want to do. Keep in mind, number one, you do not need proof. You are not an investigator. You do not need to go out and prove that this is what's happening. You do not need to question it. All you need is a reasonable concern. Your responsibility is to report. You are a mandated reporter. So you do not want to investigate and get data about what happened, when it happened, how it happened, and all of that. You are looking at more so of what you witnessed and that gut feeling that you've been given by Allah and his angels, you follow that. So report simply means that you are informing the local authorities, whether it is the Child Protective Services, the Department of Children and Family Services, or whatever it is that your state or your locale has designated as a reporting agency. That's who you are reporting to. So that's what reporting means, is that you are reporting to them. Now, when you report to them, what are they going to ask you? What do you need to tell them? What you want to do, this is a sample report form. And on this report form, you can see you're going to give them, and this is something you can keep in your handbook as well. And yes, we will share this document with you, and it will be available, inshallah. And Sister Lisa put in the chat, next week is when we'll send out the slides and the documents. So you want to give your name, the full name of the reporter, your role and your position, your phone number, your email address, and the date and time of your report. And I know in some states you do not have to give, it can be anonymous. So if it is anonymous, you still want to document this on your form at school. You still need to have this information available at school. Then you want to give the name of the child, the gender of the child, the age of the child, the grade of the child, the parents' names, the parent or guardian's names, and their address and phone number. The authorities will be asking you if you know this, and they will ask you for this. From what you've kept as data, you also want to make sure that you give the date and time of the incident, the disclosure, the age and grade of the child at the time of disclosure, the time of the incident, and the parent's name and the location again. So now what you want to do is to describe what happened. I heard a child say A, B, C. Do not interpret. I figured he was trying to say, you don't want to do that. Give the facts. Do not interpret or investigate. Just describe what was observed or what was heard. Include direct quotes from the child if applicable. And then whatever actions that you took, you also should document that. If it was after school, did you tell the parent? What did you do? What was a report made to your school authorities, to the state authorities? Who did you report to? What was the name of the person that you reported to? So you should get that information so that you can document it. And then any confirmation numbers that they've given you, you share all of that. And then the method of your reporting. Did you call them? Did you email them, or was it in person? That's important also. And in reporting abuse, then again, we say to you to recognize the signs. Trust what you see and trust your instincts. I say a journal. I call it a journal where you document what you've seen or heard. So it's not just a piece of paper that you pull out and remember it and put it and then stick it somewhere. You are also there's an amana to what you're keeping with this documentation. So you keep it in a place that not everybody can access, but you're keeping good factual information in this booklet, journal, wherever it is. It could be a document on your computer, wherever it is you're keeping it safe as well, but you're giving factual information. Use the child's words without trying to explain it or interpret it. And then the school should have protocol in place, and you want to follow that protocol. If the protocol is that you inform your supervisor, that's what you do. You inform the head of school, the principal, the counselor, if that's your policy, if that's your procedure, and it should be a part of what you're doing. Do not go out and gossip and share what happened with other colleagues and other people. You do not share this information beyond those in authority who need to know. So it may be other people in authority. You don't have to discuss, I just told principal such and such about this. You don't need to do that. Stay connected to the amana and the trust that you have been given. And then you want to also, if this is in your policy, that you report to the appropriate authority. So you call or electronically file a report via the state hotline or the agency. In some policies, it could be that the supervisor is going to report it, or it could be that the teacher will report it. All of that should be in your policies, and it should be very clear, because we don't want anything where it's gray and say, I thought she was at the, no, because bottom line is the law states that if you know and you did not report, then you are subject to be arrested and imprisoned for that.
Can I add one thing here, Sister Quran?
Yes.
Just on the documentation piece, a very simple thing that we do at our school is whenever we're either writing something in our own, whether it be a journal that a teacher is keeping or whatever place where we're perhaps jotting down observations of a student, we just to try as best as possible to not have identifying information in there. We just use initials. And again, maybe if you work with multiple grades, you may say, for example, AB 3, right? That's just whatever that student's name is, and it's third grade because maybe I teach multiple grades. If you don't even have that possibility, then you're just putting the bare minimum because you never know, right? You never know who could end up in a drawer in your school. Maybe you have a locked drawer and one day you forgot to lock it, and someone came in there and the cleaner picked up something and left it on the desk. A student walked in and sees that, starts going through it, they may come across some things, right? Like these are all appropriate considerations. And electronically, I'm sure a lot of our schools are using Google Drive, right? It's not necessarily a FERPA, the federal education, whichever one has to do with the private information, confidential information online. I'm forgetting the exact one we have, at least here in the US. Like when you go to a doctor's office, they have a very specific system to keep things. I don't think all of our schools are there just yet. So be very careful about who can access what within something like a computer or a Google Drive or your student information system. Um, just every school is going to be different, and that's where the policy comes into place. And we can't stress that enough. And Sister Quran has said it herself, myself, you got to really make sure that you're minimizing identifiable information as much as possible for your own personal record keeping. When you have to report, of course, you're going to have to give some as much as you are aware of. Um, but otherwise, it's part of that amana. And I always remind myself we are way more connected than I think sometimes. Sometimes I think someone doesn't know a child, and they absolutely do. And I would have never known the connection. So be very careful with that, inshallah.
Absolutely. And then you've heard us say, do not investigate. So when we say do not investigate, here's how it looks. Do not ask leading questions. Well, did he do this? And did she do this? You do not ask leading questions. You just get the facts. Avoid confronting the alleged perpetrator. You do not go and say, I heard you did this. And you don't do that. Avoid that and avoid problem solving as it regards to the reporting. You do not need to go and try to fix the problem. That is not the objective. And then here's what's very important, because sometimes when children say, they told me not to tell, then you may have to say to that child, for your own safety, I may need to report this, because if they say they don't want you to tell something, you have to be honest with them. So do not promise confidentiality to the child who discloses. That's important, because you may have to report it, and you don't want them to feel like you betrayed them. So you want to tell them the truth. I may have to report this. I need to tell someone whose job it is to help. And then do not delay reporting. Time matters. And every state may have a different ruling. Like here in Georgia, you have 48 hours. Somewhere else, it may be shorter. So you want to make sure you understand your state timeline for when you should be reporting. All right, let's revisit the scenario. A 10-year-old quietly tells a teacher that someone at home is doing bad things to me, but don't tell anyone. What should the teacher's response be, both in words and actions, should anyone else be involved? In the chat, go ahead and share what you think should be the teacher's response and indicate who else should be involved, if anybody.
And just to say, we did see some questions that came in that are directly related to this. So we'll have the responses come in now, and then we can come back to some of those questions that you all have posted in the chat, inshallah.
Okay. Yes, and I see someone said you document, write down what happened, and then report. Write the interaction down, report to superiors. Talk to the child and document what the child is sharing. Okay. And I would say more listen to the child. Listen to what they're sharing versus just questioning them on what it, oh, I hear you. Okay, thank you. And, listen to them. And then definitely, yes, document and report to admin. Absolutely. Okay, so you see it. And I think most importantly, going back to, we got to have policies and procedures in place. So there is no question about what needs to happen. Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Dr. Ismail.
Yeah, so a question that came here, I have some initial thoughts and you can chime in as well, Sister Quran, was would school admin have the authority to ask teachers not to report to these agencies? Okay, so I'll repeat the question again. Would school admin have the authority to ask teachers not to report to these agencies? So the answer that I'll give to that is, so provided you have, so you are a teacher at a school, you've observed a pattern that seems to be concerning for you. It has some of the signs that relate to what we've been discussing regarding child sexual abuse, grooming, or anything related to that. And you go report it to your administrator, and the administrator hears what you've said and tells you, do not report this. Inshallah, that does not happen. But if that does happen, if I was the teacher, I would still go file the report to the state authority or whatever my local authority is. Because I have to, in my conscience, be able to say that with the information that I gathered, I followed the protocol that was in place regarding my state or provincial law. I did let my supervisor know if ever it comes to that. I did come to them and say XYZ. And if they give me advice that goes contrary to the law, then I'm still going to do my duty of care and I will then fill out the report and document what I did and the conversation that I had. Um, you know, even in a private institution, you know, you must again, and we're going to talk about this in the tough questions and misconceptions piece, but the law is the law. So your mandated reporter requirement is always going to be there. And so if someone gave you that advice and your gut is telling you this is something to report and inshallah, you have the facts as you have observed them, I would just go ahead and report it. Sister Quran, any other
I
thoughts?
agree. I agree. Definitely report it because it comes back to you as the mandated reporter. Another question is about the journal that you keep. I would say, and the question is, do you keep your own documentation as a teacher or do you hand it over to the admin? I would give them the information like in that report that you file. That's maybe where you could, but you always keep your documentation. Because we have had to go to court too, and you want to always have that available and not have turned it over.
Absolutely. Yeah, the parent piece is coming. That's there's a lot to consider there. But we'll inshallah come into that. So here we've called this part tough questions and misconceptions. Because quite often they are related. And I'm gonna present some of them, but definitely with this section, the nuance that's involved, Sister Quran for sure will chime in, inshallah, as needed. So here's the framing scenario for this piece. A community member insists that reporting a respected faith teacher for misconduct would ruin the community's reputation and that issues should be handled internally, i.e., do not report out to law enforcement or the appropriate agency. How should staff and leaders respond to this mindset? So the purpose of this section is to highlight important considerations to confront cultural and institutional barriers, debunk harmful myths, and reinforce accountability through Islamic and legal principles. So what could this question look like? So for example, okay, I filed the report. Sister Qur'an and Ustad Ismail, I filed it. What now? The child may go home to their perpetrator, and the alleged perpetrator may work at the school. What do we do while we wait to see what happens from the report? All right, now, before we even give you some of these considerations, again, how your locale will approach this, all of our states, at least here in the US, have mandated reporter training, right? Sister Quran herself is a mandated reporter trainer. And they will give you guidance on how their process works. And so as a school educator and leader, being aware of what that process is important. And of course, that's one, as we call it, one stream of work. And then there's okay, this was reported to me as the school leader. I have filed the report. Now what do I actually do with the kid in my room or the kid in my building? And it will depend on what you have reported and what the context is. But some considerations. Okay, these are considerations. They're not necessarily answers because it's going to depend. Separate the child from the alleged perpetrator if the alleged perpetrator is on school grounds. So if the concern is regarding the colleague who is tutoring a student after school, you cancel tutoring after school that day, right? Or you reroute the student to work with another tutor that day, for example. Or maybe in that scenario, you just move where tutoring happens today and you dictate it happens here today. And you are present or you have another admin present, whatever, you make it work. The point is, if it's that kind of situation, then you can actually, as they're figuring out what's going on, okay, while the investigators are doing the investigating, you control what you can control. So you can control your environment, you can control who is working with a child, right? If it's a peer-to-peer thing, then you have to figure out a way to separate the the two peers from one another. Again, being mindful of there's other students around, and we want to be as careful as possible, but safety is going to be priority. Consider a comprehensive plan for the student. This will mean considering their movement in the building and their supervision. Who is, for the time being, monitoring how the student moves throughout the building. We must consider their social emotional support. Is there a safe adult that we, for example, maybe know the child already has a trusted adult? If not, we are designating somebody who either it's an administrator themselves, perhaps a counselor, someone who the child knows, okay, at any point, if you feel a concern about something, this is the person that you can go to. The school admin notifies the parents if, okay, and this is the tough part, if the parent is not the alleged perpetrator. Okay, if the child has disclosed something to you and it's about the parent or a guardian, someone that is they have right? If it's something that is an immediate concern, like if they were to leave school and they were to go to harm, then you're going to figure out a way to prevent them from going to the harm, right? Like that, and that is a very, alhamdulillah, in my years, I've personally never had that level of scenario, right? And inshallah, that's never the case, right? However, if someone is in imminent danger, then you cannot, in your right state of mind, allow the kid to walk into imminent danger, okay? If it's, for example, I know different states have different laws regarding the rules about physically disciplining a child, right? Spanking, these kinds of things. Some states are way more lenient than other states, right? And some states bruises from spanking and things are okay. I would say to that, unfortunately, right? We have religious guidance on what discipline looks like, and it does not involve bruising of a child in any way, shape, or form. But if that's the parent, then you're not you're not going to tell the parent you have reported the parent to CPS. Okay, that could put the child in even further danger, right? If it's not an immediate thing and they have gone home. Sometimes you may find out about something at the end of the school day, the child's already left. The child may already be in the place where this potential thing could have happened. In at least in state of Virginia where I am, when we report, we have to put, do we reasonably believe the child is with the alleged perpetrator at this time? Sometimes I can put yes, sometimes it may be I don't know, right? And you just have to put what you know. But the school admin, if it's, for example, the volunteer scenario, or it's a teacher scenario, or it's a peer-to-peer scenario, then you're going to have to notify the parents. And really, from the admin perspective, I would advise that you talk through the process, like what do we do at school when we get a report like this? What is the plan we put in place or are working to put in place? And what are the intended school supports that we are relying on to do this, whether it's internally or if there's maybe an external, for example, mental health, counseling online service, or it's a, whatever that third party may be, if that is the case. And as always, whenever we can work with parents, we have to, and anybody really, carefully consider the tone and the language, right? We're talking about facts. We, of course, want to come across as concerned, right? We want to be able to speak to that, but we also don't want to now raise something beyond the level of concern it needs to have, because not every situation is the same. And then again, depending on the policy you have, notify your governing body that there is some kind of report. So if, for example, you have your school board of directors, you're not going to necessarily give them the details, right? Because there's confidentiality of the child and the family, etc. But I want my school to know, my school board to know legally that I have engaged in, or someone on my staff has engaged in this action, and just to be aware that there may be some, legal things for the school to consider and to think about putting in place. Any other considerations you can think of here, Sister Quran?
No, that was good.
Okay, alhamdulillah. All right, now, second sort of tough question. What if the authorities deem the report does not meet the criteria, or was determined that no additional action will be taken? And at least in my experience, this is actually often the case. Okay. Unless it's been there's very clear signs, right? Again, it will depend on your agency. It will depend on what what you've reported, etc. But sometimes the local authority does not deem it necessary to follow up. So what if that's the case? Well, the school still has a duty of care to ensure the child's safety. So as some of you are already saying, keeping detailed records of all observations, any report you've filed, communication with any agency, and any internal decisions. Documentation will protect both the child and the institution. And as we've already been talking about, consider how you're storing that information. Make necessary supervision adjustments and environmental controls. Again, we've spoken to that a little bit. So even if they don't follow up, you can still make some adjustments and see, does that in any way help the situation? Again, this depends on what the issue is, but manage alleged perpetrators' access. So if that's a teacher with a student, you're going to have to consider what an alternative schedule may look like. If it is, the volunteer situation, well, that volunteer at this time, right? And again, I understand there's some sensitivities there. You're trying to figure out, maybe there is something that was not what was reported. Maybe the reality is different from the report. Allahu alam. But you have to act on what you know. So what you know, what has been documented for you, that's what you're going to have to act on. And that does not, and this is in the misconception piece, doing that is not a sign of su'adhan. That's not a sign of having a bad opinion of somebody. If you have what you see as a pattern and there are these signs, then that allows you to act on that presumption based on what you have. And we're not saying go all the way and, you know, call the cops on that person. The proper way is to report it, to make who needs to know, and let them do the piece, and then figure out if anything further is necessary. Communicate with parents, guardians, and provide resources for counseling. So again, maybe they don't follow up, but you know that you've engaged in that conversation with the family. You've let them know this is how, here are some resources that you can provide. And then if necessary, right, seek legal counsel. Perhaps the board, right, if your board of directors can take that kind of step on your behalf. No teacher, I think, should feel like they have to contact legal counsel on their own, right? We don't want that. There's a reason we have the hierarchy, for lack of a better term, that we have in schools. There's a certain point where certain individuals should take that on. Okay. Third one. I feel, and again, I phrase it perhaps as maybe some I know I've felt at times for sure. I feel sick to my stomach thinking about involving local law enforcement based on a suspicion, right? That's the wording we use sometimes, right? I question their involvement in my community. And this is a tough one. I want to just acknowledge that many minority and Muslim families have valid reasons to distrust law enforcement. That's just the reality that of the day we live in and where we live. However, we would put forth that mandated reporting is a legal obligation, right? And not reporting, choosing not to report, will actually most likely put more people at risk. The entire school community could be at risk. More families could be at risk. More children could be at risk, both legally and morally, right? So you're talking about minimizing harm. And mandated reporting, while yes, there may be an engagement with, for example, authorities that in situations we may have valid reasons to distrust them, we can act only with what we have the ability to do. And reporting is in reality a protective act. That's what I think for me was a big like light bulb, and framing. It's a protective action. And again, if you're in a community where there is perhaps a history of that distrust, then, consider designating a trained liaison to interact with law enforcement, right? If it comes to that kind of thing. Your policy at school may be written such that you have a certain person that is making these reports, that is front facing with the local authorities, if that were the case. And document all actions. Again, we can't stress that enough. Document all actions and recognize that CPS, Child Protective Services, or other agencies that are similar, their aim is for child safety, okay? Usually through family support before removal. And I've had that conversation with folks, like they think that just by doing this, I'm potentially separating a child from their family. Yes, potentially that is the case. But, if the child is actually being harmed, then separation is what is required, right? If that is really what's going on. If not, the family is going, the CPS or whomever is going to look at what is it that will keep the child safe before that step of perhaps removal or something like that. So again, there's not a lot of this is tough. But we just invite you to really consider for yourselves and for your schools. Again, you're here in your capacity, at least we're presenting it as I work at a school, I work at an institution. And so even if I have my own personal opinion about something, I have to follow my school's policies and procedures, and they're there for a reason. All right, some misconception.
I want
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
reiterate also the part about Child Protective Services or Department of Family and Children's Services, what I have found in most cases is that they are not looking to remove the children immediately. That is not a goal. And that could be listed as among our misconceptions. And because we've had relationships that didn't always go in favor of us as Muslims or as people of color, then it could taint also our view. But it is important to note, and I've seen it myself, that there is a protection that the agency has, and a part of why they don't want to remove is because they don't always have a place to put them. And so they work really hard to make sure that there is a safe place for the child to go where they don't have to remove. And right now, the court systems are aware of the emotional challenge that it could cause to children. So there is a lot that I know for sure that these agencies are working towards and not necessarily looking to remove children from the home at an immediate report. But there are cases where they need to, and we want to make sure we're doing our part, as you said, to protect the child.
Thank you for that. All right, so our last little bit before we perhaps have some more Q&A and some final closing thoughts and commitments is a few misconceptions. There are more, but we're trying to address some critical ones right now. So number one, this is a family matter, so outsiders should not get involved. Again, depending on what was disclosed. So we also wanted to put forth what this could also sound like. Things that are similar that actually have the same underlying issue. But that, adult has the right to discipline the child. It's a family thing. They do their discipline their own way. We do not fully understand their family dynamics. Maybe, again, someone may not articulate this, but these are the things that swirl in the mind sometimes. Well, that child has lied in my class before. How do I know if they're lying now? Or that they aren't telling the truth now? What if my report leads to family issues? Well, what we would put forth as the truth here is the objective, the maqsad, right? The sacred aim here of removal of harm overrides a family's right to privacy or the potential for further family issues. The removal of harm, la darar wa la dirar, the Prophet ﷺ said, do not harm people and do not reciprocate harm. Very clear from the blessed tongue of the Prophet ﷺ. That's going to override these sorts of considerations. Again, with what you have documented and have observed as a pattern behavior, unless it's something that is just straight up very clear to see, is abuse of some way, shape, or form. Number two, reporting this without verifying the information constitutes the sin of ghiba, backbiting, and or namima, telling tales. This may also sound like we should not report the person to avoid scandal. This may also sound like, how can I file a report without all the facts at hand? I.e., I have some, but maybe I don't have the whole picture. I know this person so well. They would never do this. Here we would put forth the maqsad, the objective of protecting a child dictates informing those who need to know, right? That's the critical piece here. Those who need to know of the allegations, right? So for example, as a teacher at a school, you need to let your supervisor know. If it's your head of school, your principal, whoever that is, like I would put forth that in the school policy, you should let them know because at least at our school, I always ask, teachers, like, I don't want you to feel that burden alone because it's a tough thing. So let's talk through it together and we'll file the report together or whatever the case may be, right? And then it stops there, right? The local, reporting agency knows, and then the family of that child would know, and I would keep it to that. I would just let the board know that we have filed a report. That's it. Justice is to be upheld no matter who is involved. Riba and namima, these are terms that get thrown around a lot, backbiting and telling tales. They have, of course, a place in the religion, but they do not override the harm that could be from not speaking up to those who need to know. All right, 1 second here. Okay, so actually, I had those two, and there again, there may be more, but here is the scenario. Going back to the scenario. A community member insists that reporting a respected faith teacher for misconduct would ruin the community's reputation, and that issues should be handled internally. How should staff and leaders respond to this mindset? So, with what we've looked at, how could staff and leaders respond to this mindset? What can schools do to proactively tackle this, sort of frame of mind? You can put in the chat what you think. Yeah, at the end of the day, this isn't a manna. That would be a damaging mentality. Report regardless of the status of the person. Absolutely. Again, informing your school community of your policy. Having, for example, at our school, we have our student wellness team and our wellness program, and we're working on our, monthly parent wellness sessions. 30 minutes, 45 minutes to pick a topic as is appropriate throughout the year to review with families about maybe something that they need regarding their child's development or something that we're doing at school. So we want to put forth like where we discuss kind of how do we as school leaders or as our school approach these kinds of things. Again, we're not going to give every single detailed piece of the policy to admin to families, but we'll talk in the generic sense and speak to the bigger framework as we talk to them. And the same with our staff. As part of our staff training and our teacher in-service week, alhamdulillah, Sister Quran led that piece for ISLA during the PD week that ISLA offered, right? So making sure that we as educators and leaders are advocating for our staff to go through these kinds of trainings. So that again, وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, so that you are knowing of the trust and you act appropriately. Okay, I'm just looking at some of the chat, inshallah. Okay, alhamdulillah. Some good answers coming in here. Right, alhamdulillah. There has to be a balance. There has to be a balance between community sensitivity, the legal procedures, emphasizing the protection of the child. That's why, for us, we fully believe that you all know your context, right, where you are the best. And that is a good thing, but that also sometimes can be a blinder to what you need to do. And it can become an excuse potentially for not, doing what is the best practice. So there is a balance there, and we want to acknowledge that. But hopefully, inshallah, and this is just a start, right? We could have another 2 hours probably, about further scenarios and further tough questions. But we hope this at least begins to inform how you think about it. And for those who have already been, alhamdulillah, then just help further refine, inshallah. So I'm going to hand it over to Sister Quran to kind of walk us through some what we hope are commitments you'll have and close, and then we can get to some of the questions, inshallah. Excellent questions that you all have.
I mean, yes, and just a reminder to us that it is not enough for us to know that we are mandated reporters, or for us to say that we love our children and that we take this role seriously if we're not tying our camels and demonstrating this serious commitment. And that's why we were so moved to develop this whole toolkit that we're working on sexual abuse prevention, We do not want to be those with our heads buried in the sand. We know it's important for us to stand up straight and take a stand for what is right. And these are tough decisions that we're making. This is where real character comes into play, where we can show our courage and our love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and our love for those he has entrusted to us. So we know that it's been a lot today. And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to share what you've learned, any questions that you may have in the beginning. I said, write down what you want to get out of this. Make sure that you've gotten it. And I just want to go through just the toolkit that we have, and where we look at where do we go from here. And so we invite you then to consider to commit. Create a school where every child feels safe, seen, heard, and protected. We want you to commit to model respect, to model dignity, and care for every student as a sacred trust. It is our duty, and we hope that you will help ensure that our schools have clear, enforced safeguarding policies. Some of our policies that we've looked at have been vague and unclear. Let's be really, really clear. Let's have that bayina, that clear evidence for what we're doing. Support a culture of accountability, transparency, and safety in our institutions. And then do as the Quran tells us to do, to stand for justice, stand for what's right, even if it's against our own selves. And treat our children these children who are our amana, treat them in a way that shows our love for Allah, our commitment to what he has given us, and our integrity itself, inshallah. And so where do we go from here? We are now ready to have our toolkit that we're working on. Inshallah, it will be available to you very, very soon. And just want to go through some of the things you can expect in the toolkit. So this toolkit that we have a mission of demonstrating our love for our children and safeguarding them, understanding what Allah has given us. So our vision is that every school in our schools throughout the United States and the world, really, but we're focused on schools in the United States. Every school will have a way to safeguard our children, will have this amana, and we will guide this process in protecting our children. Our goal also, the scope of this toolkit, is that you will, inshallah, have access to the things you need and want. You have indicated what you need, and we pray that we're able to provide that. So that's what we're working on right now. We've gathered some of our great leaders, like Dr. Ismail, to join us in preparing this toolkit. And this toolkit is going to have education and training for you, for your staff, for parents, even for your children. It will, inshallah, have safety and prevention resources that you will be able to use. We will also be able to have, the other day I was thinking, what if we did a session just on how to talk to children about this subject, just the language that we use, then how to respond and support the tools, policies and procedures for our handbooks, as well as there will be, inshallah, a media library that you will be able to use and have videos, books to use, lesson plans that you can use. That's our goal. That's our prayer for the toolkit. And we mentioned it earlier. So our target audience would be you, the educators and school staff. Then it will also be parents and caregivers. It will be children and teens, and then community and faith leaders, inshallah. And my number is the next. Oh, do we have? Yes, there you go. There is my number if you want to send information to me, or and my email address. I prefer email. So if you send an email to us, inshallah, we will be able to support you in making sure you get what you need. And our next slide is for you to go ahead and give a review of today's session. So you can scan the QR code, or you can see the tiny URL. And I don't know if Lisa can drop that link in the chat so that they could just click it to give a review of today's session, because it helps your honest review helps us to guide our practices and what we're doing. So we love to hear from you and how we can best serve you in what we're doing as we prepare the toolkit. And we thank you so very much for your presence today. Are there any questions, information we did not share that you want to hear?
There's one here that was sent to us privately. There was a question regarding finding questionable items in a school desk. So maybe it's a teacher is walking around, finds. I'll speak from my experience. I've found a student's journal. I actually wasn't going looking for it, but it just fell out of a desk, actually, subhanAllah. And it opened up as it fell, and then I read something and I had to take action. Again, as someone brings something into your building, you have the authority to look at it, right? And again, that will fall on your school policy, etc. But I would push that, if you have a reason to look for something, again, with adab, with respect, with care and sensitivity, um, and you find something that is questionable, then you have to follow the same. That's a fact, right? It's a piece of evidence that you have, and then you have to look at are there other signs, what's going on. I let an administrator know. I figure out how I can ascertain more information to then decide if it, is a combination of things to then go and report.
Amen.
Um, Another related quick question to that is, does CCTV coverage count as evidence? So, I can't speak to that from a legal perspective because I'm not a lawyer or work in law enforcement. But what I'll just say is, from what I understand, if a local authority, were to ask me for that camera footage, for example, if it's something that I have, it depends again on your school system or whatever, then I'm going to work to cooperate with them in the best way that I can to get them what they need. I know for sure myself when when a student has reported something to me, I have gone through my school's school camera system to be able to figure out if it happened, let's say in the hallway somewhere. I go back and look, and that's part of my internal gathering of evidence. Is it legal evidence? That I'm not going to answer, but it could be part of what you have, another way of observing, or getting a sense of what has been observed in the building. So
Yes.
that's how I would
For
approach
the
that.
toolkit, I see several questions about the toolkit. Inshallah, it will be available on the ISLA website. And when we have it fully completed, and inshallah, we're almost there, we will send a newsletter out, send it through via our newsletter. So make sure you're on our mailing list, inshallah.
Okay, another question here. And just to be respectful of time, if anybody does have to go, inshallah, we want to make sure that you don't feel like you have to stay. And also this is being recorded, so if you want to go back and hear the Q&A because you have to go, it's there, inshallah. A sister in the US sent me, I'm just going to read it because it's quite long. A sister in the US sent me news that a Quran teacher near her had sexually abused children when he was teaching, and then he was sent to Canada and Quebec, a neighboring province. She asked me to do something, but I couldn't gather the evidence that made me sure enough to report it to the school in Quebec. What can I do? Okay, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, someone either has alleged sexual abuse, has been alleged to have committed some form of sexual abuse prior somewhere else, and is now in a neighboring, is now perhaps nearby. I couldn't gather the evidence and not sure enough to report it. Okay, what can I do? So again, we're operating off of what happens within your school or something that you are aware of yourself. This case, in my understanding, would fall outside of that scope unless the person was coming for an interview to the school or something like that. Like if that was the case, then okay, we may take a different set of protocol. Um, but if it's not something that you are aware of that there is some imminent harm of, or it's just been mentioned to you, but there's no risk or something, I think you have to do some level of trying to figure out, well, what how's it impacting me or some student or family that I know of. So again, outside of any further detail, I think we'd have to get more information there to determine what to do.
Right, because she says that they had sexually abused the children. So I don't know if that was reported and they were convicted and they're
Yeah,
out
exactly.
and what are they served. So we need to know that, what is that process that took place for that, and then they left, because we do know people who go from state to state, and that's why we do background checks. That's why we keep that documentation as well. So we would need to know more in order to be able to say exactly what should happen.
Yeah, and I see here someone said no, not convicted, but just sent away. If it's something that's been that the community is aware of, then your school's not going to hire that person, right? Like that's just there is redemption with Allah, right? I always tell people like Allah will redeem people. Tawbah is always open to Allah. That doesn't mean just because Allah has perhaps forgiven somebody that I have to let them work with children in my school, right? They could do
That's
something
another
else.
tie your camel.
Right. Yeah, they could do something else. They have their redemption arc with Allah, but they're not working in my school. If that has been a very clear, convicted thing that we know about, others know about, there's been warnings made. Um, yeah, no way. That I'm not taking that chance or that risk. Again, they could do something else in a way that still benefits the ummah, but it's not going to be with kids in my school. No way. All right. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone.
Thank you
So
so very
Lisa, do you
much.
have anything else on the ISLA side as our
No.
moderator today?
Assalamualaikum. Thank you so much for this valuable presentation. Appreciate people are filling out this survey. So again, the surveys are for feedback so that Dr. Ismail and Sister Qur'an can better develop the toolkit. The toolkit is a work in progress, really based on the needs of school educators like yourself. So it's super important to provide that feedback so they can determine what best, what direction to go. But also if you need a certificate of participation, either for your school or for yourself, completing the survey will give us your name and email address so we can provide a certificate of participation. So please make sure you type your name carefully. I know myself, occasionally I go fast and I tape there's a misspelling. So if you like a certificate, make sure you spell your name correctly and it'll be sent to the email provided. So just make sure that those two items are correct. But I really would like your feedback. It really helps ISLA as well as Dr. Ismail and Sister Qur'an develop the toolkit. So thank you.
Someone asked for the survey again. I just dropped it.
And we'll probably hang on to stuff a couple more minutes. I think I'll go ahead and stop recording.